and recently feminist theories of crime, which talk about females having a unique pathway into offending and delinquency. General explanations of delinquency and offending behavior does not explain or explore extreme behaviors as the life course theory does. The life course perspective includes the explanation of extreme delinquent behavior and chronic offending. The objective of this research study is to examine the effects of life course perspective of female juvenile offending. This research will identify among females the behavioral precursors that explain later criminal or delinquent behavior to predict chronic violent juvenile offending. Prior research. The life course perspective is a lens through which life unfolds, seeing how early differences in behavior translate into early life outcomes. And this work was done by Elder in 1986. Sampson and Lau, in their research, discussed the life course has been defined as pathways, or defines life course as pathways through the age-differentiated lifespan. Two central concepts underlie the analysis of life course dynamics, and that's a trajectory and a transition. A trajectory is a pathway or a line of development over the lifespan, such as work, marriage, parenthood, self-esteem, and criminal behavior. Transitions are specific life events that are embedded in trajectories and evolve over shorter time spans, for example, getting married or obtaining your first child. Age is one of the most fundamental concepts related to crime according to the life course theory. Crime is highly age-graded, meaning that criminal behavior follows certain developmental pathways that are closely tied to the age effect. And in addition to that, they talk about early onset being what is fundamental about life course perspective of criminal offending. Part of the problem appears to be that adolescence also triggers crime and deviance among a broader selection of adolescents, referred to as adolescent limited offenders. These children engage in low levels of misbehavior primarily associated with peer-centered social arrangements. Thus, serious chronic offenders who have histories of misbehavior begin to look like other children during a period of adolescence. So my data. I'm going to utilize secondary data obtained from Elliott's National Youth Survey. The National Youth Survey is a longitudinal study that consists of face-to-face interviews with youth in the United States. Personal interviews were conducted with youth and their parents at 7 waves. The first waves of interviews were conducted in 1976, the second in 1977, the third in 78, the fourth in 79, the fifth in 1980, the sixth in 1983, and the seventh in 1987. For each wave except the seventh, youth and their parents were surveyed for events and behaviors that occurred during the previous year. And so the study lasted over a period of 10 years. And in addition to that, in 1976, the youngest participant was age 12. During the second wave, data was only collected from young adults on events and behaviors that occurred during the previous calendar year, with the young adults age ranges between 20 to 29. And like I said when I began, this research is in the initial phases of the data collection process. I've obtained from ICPSR data from the first three waves and the seventh wave, and I'm waiting on them to send me the data for the fourth, fifth, and sixth wave. Participants, oh, and one more thing about the data. I know that the years are relatively, well, not old, but they're older years than what's being studied now. And so what I want to do is I want to determine if the life course perspective has an effect on female juvenile offending, to look at a more recent data, like the National Youth Survey, the National Longitudinal Survey that was done in 1997 that just ended in 2007. So I did want to say that, and this is just to see if an effect is there. So the participants of interest for this research is the entire population. Therefore, all of the 1,725 cases surveyed will be included for data analysis. Indeed, females are the specific focus of this research. However, the entire population is analyzed for a basis of comparison. On my measures, the key concept that guides offending from males is antisocial behavior, and that's really all I have to go on when I'm looking at the life course perspective. The DSM-4 describes antisocial behavior, and this is a loose definition of antisocial behavior, as patterns of behavior that is verbally or physically harmful to other people, animals, or property, including behaviors that severely violate social expectations for a particular environment. So similar to deviance is how antisocial behavior is viewed. This description was utilized to determine predictive variables when applying the life course perspective to female juvenile offenders. So my predictive variables were selected based on the life course literature, individual factors such as low intelligence, low school achievement, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, risk-taking, antisocial child behavior, including aggression and bullying. Family factors such as poor parental supervision, harsh discipline, child abuse, inconsistent discipline, a cold parental attitude, child neglect, low involvement of parents with children, parental conflict, broken families, criminal parents, and delinquent siblings will be looked at as family factors. Socioeconomic factors such as low income, large family size will be looked at. Peer factors, school factors, and neighborhood factors. The survey questions that fall into the categories of the identified life course factors and antisocial behavior factors such as socioeconomic status of the resident's parents, friends, neighborhood problems, education, employment skills, aspirations, encouragement, normlessness, attitudes towards deviance, exposure to delinquent peers were all looked at for data analysis. And in addition to that, the survey questionnaires were elaborate scale items, and so I'm in the process of merging the variables to see I'm looking at merging the variables to see if I can have particular categories or if I need to include each individual question as a variable. So my outcome variable is self-reported delinquency as determined by the life course literature. And Farrington describes the main component of crime and delinquency as antisocial behavior. So my model specification, once I receive all of the data from each 7 wave of the survey, I'm going to do a logistic regression to determine if I can predict female delinquency or crime by the set of predictive variables that I identified. And I'm doing a logistic regression because my outcome variable is if the female engaged in delinquency or crime or not. And so it's a discrete variable, and that's why I'm doing a logistic regression. So after all, the predictive and in addition to that, my predictive variables were not normally distributed, they were not linearly related, and they did not have equal variances in each group. So, and that's the end. Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was looking for any psychological perspectives because you're talking about age of onset and when they're starting their criminal behavior. I would like for you to look at the cognitive behavior and psychological perspectives with the other theories that you're looking at.
Well, with the life course perspective, psychological components are identified as risk factors. So when they talk about early onset, and I don't have this information with the National Youth Survey, but they talk about prenatal trauma and some other things that occur. And so it's integrated. The life course theory is a real integrated theory. So some of the risk factors or some of the factors that I'm looking at as predictors of life course delinquency are psychological factors.
So you pull those in your question that you draw?
I'm pulling those in the questionnaire. Yeah. And I have a copy of the questionnaire, and it's the 7th wave if you want to look at the variables and the questions that were asked. But psychological components are integrated in the life course theory. And Terry Moffitt, she talked a lot about psychological factors contributing to life course offending. So,
well, I was looking for that. That's what.
Yes. But her study, but with that, I was looking at the general gist of life course, which is mostly applied